this is Karen with newclevelandradio.net, and it's time for Avoid the Maze, your journey through life. And my guest today is Cindy Burns. And some of you probably, as you start to hear the podcast, may say, no, I don't want to listen to this. No, uh, I don't want to think about grief. I don't want to think about losing a family member, a spouse, a child. Um, but you know what? That's part of life. And no, we don't want to think about it. But those of us who don't prepare, when it comes time, we will grieve. And most of the people around us will not understand. I'm sure, Cindy, you heard the same words that many of us have heard. It'll get better. It's like, how is it going to get better? It gets different.
It definitely gets different.
And other things around it might get better, but the grief itself does not get better. It's always there. So welcome to Avoid the Maze, and give my listeners a little understanding of who you are and what grief and life purpose is all about.
Well, first of all, thank you for having me. Excuse me, my throat is clogged. I'm Cindy Burns, and my claim to fame for many years was that I was the mother of 6 sons. As they were leaving the nest, we found out that my husband had lung cancer. My youngest was going into his senior year of high school. And the progression of the disease was very quick. He was only sick for 4 or 5 months before he was gone. And he had been a police officer. He was retired, but he had been a police officer. So I used to try to imagine what I would be, how it would feel if I got that call, or, something happened and I could never quite do it. But because of that, I thought I would be prepared for his passing. And I wasn't. I did good. The night he died, I did really fine. His passing was very peaceful. I was holding his hand. He opened his eyes. He looked at me. Then he closed his eyes and he was gone. So that was, not everybody gets that.
Right, exactly.
Yeah, it doesn't happen for everybody. So I know I was blessed with that. But I don't remember how I got back to my house that night. And I had spent the entire time in the hospital with him. I never went home.
Wow.
And because his doctors like to come in at like 5 or 6 in the morning.
Yeah.
And I wanted to be there to talk to them. And as he got sicker, he needed more care during the night than the nurses were able to provide. So I hadn't been home. And I stood there with my back to the door and just said, I cannot go in there without him. It just came over me that, this was our home.
Right.
And I could do it. I mean, obviously I did. I want to thank my daughter-in-law. She was wonderful. And, she just kind of held me and walked with me through the door. And that was, I think, one of the hardest parts of losing him, was that. And there were a few others during the funeral and a couple other times. But I did okay, I thought. I went back to work after about 2 weeks, and I worked from home. This was long before COVID. It was long before everybody worked from home, but I was in the medical transcription field, so I was able to work from home. And so I didn't have to go into an office. I could have a meltdown during the day if, if it came over me, nobody would know. And I did okay. And like, people would ask, how you doing? And I'd say, I'm okay. And I thought I meant it. And then my sons started needing me. One got married and had a baby, and then just baby was like maybe about a year after she was born, he found out he had testicular cancer. So I went out to take care of the baby. Actually, no, she was only 4 months old. That's right. Um, the surgery was later. He had major surgery after that, but I went out and helped out taking care of the baby so that he and his wife could concentrate on, getting him
Right.
better, taking him to all of his appointments and everything. So I was there for that entire summer. And then I came home, and then another son needed me. Um, he'd been in a car accident. He and his wife were unable to drive, and they lived about 4 hours away. So I kind of commuted. I'd live most of the time with them, and then part of the time back at my house. And this went on for 3 or 4 years.
Oh, wow.
And there were a bunch of different other things that took my attention away from grieving. And eventually I retired. My sons all got settled. They were all healthy. Nobody needed me anymore. And I sunk into a deep, dark pit of depression. And it wasn't sadness. I don't want anybody, depression doesn't necessarily mean you're sad and crying all the time.
Right.
For me, it showed up in binge eating. It showed up as not taking care of myself. I would shower maybe once a week. And in between, I stayed in my pajamas all day because why bother? I never left the house. COVID came along and it was wonderful for me because I had an excuse. And I finally realized that, you know, I could live another 20 or 30 years. And did I really want to live it the way I was?
Yeah.
And, I decided, nope, that's not going to fly. So I talked to my doctor, got on some medication, which I was I was very blessed. The first medication we tried worked. Now, a lot of times you have to keep trying different
Right.
ones to find
Exactly.
the combination or whatever. But I was very lucky and found the right medicine at the right time. And so then I started looking around and thinking, okay, I need a reason to get out of bed in the morning. I need a purpose. And I had a lot of false starts. I tried things that didn't work out.
We all do.
Yeah, exactly. I tried selling makeup. I don't wear makeup. I I took art classes and joined the local art society. I can't draw stick figures. So, I tried a bunch of different things, but they served their purpose. They got me out of the house. They got me meeting new people, trying new things, and there's never anything wrong with that. But they still weren't my purpose.
Right.
They weren't my why. And I just kind of lucked into the idea of life coaching. And the very first course I saw was a life purpose coach. And the light bulb over the head went on. And I took the course, and as it turned out, by the time I was certified, I knew everything that was in there. I just hadn't applied it to myself.
Exactly.
So I learned to apply it to myself because the way this particular uh, school taught was they taught it to us first and then taught it so that we could learn to teach it to
Got
others.
it. Right.
So everything we learn, we apply to us first. And it was wonderful. It really worked for me. And I knew that, the people that needed me the most were people like me. people who had gone through something horrific, and maybe they're at the beginning of the grief, maybe they're 5 or 6 years in, because it was a good 6 or 7 years after Dan died that I went through this. And so grief can overtake you and take over your life at any time.
Absolutely.
And it comes, like you said, it's with you forever. It doesn't go away. It gets easier to manage. Once you've been through it, when it rears its ugly head at some point, there's a trigger, a song comes on in the grocery store,
Yep.
or different things, whatever the trigger is. And sometimes the trigger is it's Tuesday afternoon.
Yep.
But whatever the trigger is, you'll get through it because you've gotten through it already. You've
Exactly.
done it. The first time is the hardest. And there are ways of coping, but you don't want to negate your feelings. You don't want to push them aside, because that's what I did. And I ended up with a bleeding ulcer.
Oh,
So you don't want to push them down. You don't want to, as I call it, eat your feelings.
right.
You want to let them out. You want to feel your feelings. And it hurts. I know it does. But it's good for you. It's like, getting with your child, you take them to the doctor and they don't want to get the shot, but they have to because it's good for them.
Right.
That's what you've got to feel your feelings. You've got to process them. You've got to, as I said, you name them. This one's anger, this one's regret, this one's fear, this one's loneliness. And if you can't quite figure out a name for it, call it Fred. Today was a Fred day, and just so that so
And
that the next time it comes around, you'll say, okay, I've felt this before. This is familiar. How did I get through it before? What did I do to help? And it gets easier.
well, it also sounds like you went through other grieving situations and maybe
Yes.
you hadn't labeled it, okay, with your,
Empty nest.
your son getting
Oh,
cancer.
yeah.
So the first thought of your mind probably is, am I going to lose my son?
I,
There's a newborn baby.
I
Um,
told God, I said, you took my husband, you're not taking my son.
and even though you don't want to go there, your brain still
Oh,
goes
yeah.
there.
Oh, yeah.
And once that situation is resolved, and in this case, luckily he's healthy and everything got
Yeah,
resolved,
everything's
but they
perfect.
don't need you anymore now. That's the second time you're not needed.
Yeah.
Okay. And then, taking care of your other son and your daughter-in-law, you sound like you were that nurturer your whole life.
I'm a caregiver. Yeah.
So here it comes now. Everybody's healthy. Hey, mom, go live your life.
It's
And
like, what is my life? Yeah. Oh, in the meantime, also 3 years after my husband died, my mother died. So yeah, I had that in there too. So, and when all this kind of thing happens, the empty nest syndrome, the death of my husband, the death of my mother, and happens in a fairly short period of time, it's called complicated grief. And a lot of us go through it. A lot of people, they say death seemed to come in threes or whatever, bad luck comes in threes. A lot of us go through that. And one of my messages is you're not alone, and you don't have to do it alone.
exactly.
Either find a coach, or find a trusted friend or a relative, or maybe a church, your pastor or priest, whatever. Find somebody that you can lean on and that doesn't judge you, because some of the feelings you're going to come up with, you're judging yourself already. There's a lot of guilt involved in grief. It's a normal thing. one of the first things everybody says to me is, I feel so guilty, or I should have done this. And everybody, everybody feels that way.
Exactly. You know,
And just knowing that makes a difference.
sometimes the problem is we reach out to the people we think are going to nurture us and be there for us. Um, First holidays, family wants you at the holiday, but you know what? It's not the same holiday for you.
So,
There's that empty chair. And even though your boys saw the empty chair, they still had a life going on around them.
mhm,
And so people want to know, well, hey, mom, or hey, aunt, or hey, sis, why are you crying? Come
yeah.
on, we're all together. I remember my mother had a stroke. She didn't know she had a stroke. She didn't know she was blind.
Oh,
96 and a half years old. And the doctor said to us, well, we'll send her to therapy, but we can't tell her she's blind because she believes she can see. I said, how do you send her to therapy? Well, they'll teach her, where her fork is in her. I said, but you're telling her you're not telling her she's blind. You're not giving into that. And they said, you can't. At 96 and a half with this stroke, she probably is starting to go through dementia.
mhm,
So if she thinks she can see, we've got to meet her there. And it was that decision that I said, I'm going to move in with her. I'll stay here as long as I can. Yes, we had caregivers, but I needed to be there because I didn't want anybody to slip and tell her something that she couldn't deal with.
yeah, that she couldn't process.
And I found in the last 2.5 months of her life, my brother spent a lot of time with us as well. He would get her to laugh. And in the beginning, I was getting angry. It was, why are we laughing? We know she's dying. And I pulled him to a side and I said, how dare you? And he goes, what do you mean, how dare me? You're going to love this in a month, 6 months, 10 years from now, because you're going to remember the funny things that we talked about. I'm now so grateful to him for that because even after her funeral, the day after, we got together as a family and we went out and had a fun day because we knew her. She didn't want us sitting in a house in black
Mhm,
crying for her.
yeah. My husband wore tie-dye after he retired from the police department. He missed he missed the 70s. He
Okay.
was in the Navy, and then he was in the Army Reserves, and then he was always in a uniform. And so he let his hair grow, put it in a ponytail, wore tie-dye. So we requested people to wear tie-dye to
I
his.
love it.
I still have this blue tie-dye shirt that I wore to the funeral. And my sister-in-law, his sister, made ribbons, memorial ribbons
Yeah,
out of tie-dye and handed them out. And my sons still have theirs. Um, so yeah, that was his, because he wouldn't. And humor is the way my family processes things. Especially my sons. My husband was like that too. He said, if you don't laugh, you're going to cry, and it's better to laugh. The day before my husband died, we're doing what they were calling death watch. He was basically in a medically induced coma. He didn't know what was going on, but he could probably hear, because they say that the hearing is like one of the last things to go, one of the
okay.
last senses. But so if he heard, he was enjoying every minute of it. And one of my sons asked the nurse, do you have a broom? And she said, well, no, but I can get housekeeping to come in and clean up anything if you've spilled something. He said, no. He said, I need a stick, because if we don't poke him, how will we know when he's gone?
Oh. Oh.
And the rest of us just burst out laughing. And she's like, what? And I remember in the IC, when he was in the cardiac care ICU at one point, and my sons were all in the waiting room for that. And they were all, they get, I don't know if you have sons or not, but
I do.
they all try to one up each other.
Yeah.
You know, they try to get a bigger laugh than the other one did, and they feed off each other's energy. And most of the time they were alone in there, so it was okay. But there was one time when there was a family that was kind of sitting off to the corner that I could tell that they were really stressed, and I had to ask my sons, tone it down.
Yeah.
You know, this might be a good time to curl up and take a nap or something. Because not everybody enjoys it.
But sometimes people don't think they're enjoying it. But if it's there, it can help relieve the stress. As I told you before we started recording, we do a show called Grief Belief. And we started it because a friend of mine had written on Facebook this long post about the death of her husband. And then it happened a number of years previous. I went to high school with her. We had just reconnected. And as I read this story, it was shocking, upsetting, but the way she also wrote it, it was like, this is so real. I can't call her and say, things like, Carol, I'm sorry. What I called her and I said was, thank you for sharing. Now I understand who you were married to. I understand some of the things you went through, but the reality of it is, I still don't understand. And I'm not the only one. And she went on to share with me that new people she met, relationships were great. People didn't expect her to be one way or the other.
Yeah.
But the older relationships, she'd go back home to Minnesota where we went to high school, and she would see friends and they'd say, oh, you look like you're getting over things. She said, he was the love of her life, and yes, at this point of her life, she did have a boyfriend. Okay. But he was still the love of her life.
Yeah,
And her boyfriend
still miss
understood that
him.
because he had a previous love.
Uh,
And when we can start to understand that life goes on,
mhm.
our significant others they wouldn't suffer. They don't want to suffer behind. They don't want us to suffer behind.
Yeah.
And so, and we all have to do it differently. And I love the fact that you realized that you needed more of a purpose. It wasn't just being a wife. It wasn't being a widow. It wasn't just being a mother of 6. It wasn't just being a grandmother. Okay. You needed a purpose, something to keep you going.
Yeah. Something that fed into my soul and helping other people in this way, especially. And we can never completely understand, even if the situations are exactly the same. I couldn't understand what you were going through. I can understand the feelings. I can commiserate, but we're different people. Our situations are different. You can't, no two griefs are exactly the same, and no two people grieve the same. And like
Exactly.
the way I grieve from my mother or my father is different than the way I grieve from my husband. As a matter of fact, the way I grieve from my mother is different than the way I grieved for my father.
Yes.
So every grief is different, even within the same person. And you can't always predict how you're going to feel about anything. You could think you might, but you never know for sure. But I think we need to talk about it more so that people know what they can do for others. A lot of times too, especially becoming a widow, when you lose your husband, a lot of times you lose friends because first of all, they might back off because they don't know what to say or because they think they're giving you space. And that's not what you need. You know, you need to know that you can rely on people, but you're not going to ask.
Right.
They'll say, call me if you need anything.
Yeah.
And no, I'm not going to do that. And, or what can I do for you? You know, especially in the first few days, it's like, I have no idea. I don't know. I've never been in this situation
Right.
before. I don't know what you can do for me.
Exactly.
So it better to ask at the funeral home, ask the funeral directors, what kind of things do you suggest that I do to help this person? Because they've been, you know, they've seen it.
Right.
If they're a younger person and they've got younger children, show up one day, say, I'm going to watch the kids. You can go take a shower, take a nap, go to the store, do whatever you want. You know, lock yourself in your room and cry if you need to, but I got the kids. Or, you know, show up one day with a box of chocolates and say, we're going to watch movies together, you know,
Exactly.
and,
Yeah.
and hang out on candy, you know, just various things like that. It don't give them a choice because we'll say no. We'll, you know, do you want to, how about you come, you know, come for coffee tomorrow? And it's like, yeah, I don't know. You know, you just not sure you really want to see people. Instead, show up with a Starbucks or show up and say, come on, I got these errands to run, but I don't want to do it alone. Just show up.
And also show up not just initially,
Yes.
but be there next year, the
3 months,
following,
6 months. Yep.
because that was one of the things my girlfriend Carol said. Everybody kept initially, you know, I want to take you out to lunch. I want to do this. I want to do that. And there were things that she knew that she wanted to do first for herself.
Mhm.
And she kept saying to them, and I guess she was a little bit more prepared than most, but she kept saying to them, come back, keep coming back and asking. I will take you up on it. But now this is what I have to do. And she
Yeah.
said, and a few people even offered, can I help you do that? And there were certain things that, yes, she said, sure.
Yep.
But there were other things that she needed to do for her. And hers was very sudden because her husband got hurt at work
Oh,
and they called her and, you know, he never said another word to her. And for a week, you know, she laid next to him as, you know, he lay dying. So
mm,
hers was very, very traumatic.
yeah.
Okay. Yours was traumatic because he was a law officer, you know,
Mhm.
took care of himself, and now he gets cancer.
Yeah.
Um,
59 years old. He wanted to make it to 60 and he didn't. See, men in his family generally died before they were 60. His
and
father did, his uncle did, his grandparents did. So he wanted to make it to 60. He didn't make it. He was
but it
shy of
sounds
50.
like he left a nice legacy for you and his sons and his grandkids.
Yeah, a lot of memories, a lot of things to laugh about and stories to tell. Yeah.
So how do clients find you? Because this is the interesting part. There are so many of us out there. Now, I don't do grief coaching. So as soon as somebody, you know, contacts me and I see it's grief, not that I couldn't go take the certification, but that's not me. Okay. And
Right.
I know that's
Yeah,
not
some people can't
my
do it.
purpose. I understand it, I listen, and then I refer them. But a lot of, individuals don't even understand there is grief coaching available.
Yeah, nobody Googles grief coach.
Yeah.
You know, they just Google grief
Yep.
or widow, you know. And yeah, it's hard. Most of the clients I've found have either been word of mouth, they've been referred by somebody, or they find me through my Facebook group. I have
Okay.
a Facebook group, Widows and Widowers Finding Purpose. No, Widows and Widowers Support Group, Finding Purpose. And so, you know, they find me through that. And some go into the group and that's all they need. You know, it's a free group and they just find out that, okay, there's other people. They just need the validation of their
Right.
feelings.
Yep.
Other people need a little more. You know, they don't know what to do next and how to move forward. And I never say move on. It's moving forward. Moving on feels like you're leaving something behind.
Exactly.
Moving forward, you're taking it with you. And you don't get over, you get through. You still, you know, it's still there, but you're managing. You can
Absolutely.
live a good and happy life while you're grieving, you know. And if you stop and think about it, everybody grieves. You may grieve, say you had a horrible childhood, or you were the oldest of children and your parents just couldn't cope with taking care of the kids, so you ended up taking care of them. You grieve for the childhood you didn't have.
Right.
You don't know that, but that's true. Maybe your best friend moved when you were 10 years old and you still miss that friendship. You never actually had a friend like that ever again. You're grieving for that. There's all divorce, huge cause of grief on
Right.
both sides, especially if you're not the person who initiated it. We don't get through life, even if we die young, we don't get through life without experiencing grief in some form. Most of us can handle it fine. Most of us can handle it fine until it all gangs up on us.
Exactly.
And we need help. Some of us, and it's not a weakness. It just means you're not prepared, and nobody really can be. But for some reason, it just hits you differently than it hits somebody who doesn't need help.
Exactly.
And what I hope, I work a little differently than a lot of other grief coaches. I of course help you through the worst of it, you know, talking, saying, yes, that's normal, you know, tell me about that kind of thing. I can give you some ideas of what to say and do to other people, especially if they say something that's hurtful to you. They generally, 99% of the time, they don't mean to hurt you.
Absolutely.
It comes out wrong. But you know, different things like that. But then I help you to learn who you are now, because it doesn't matter who you lost, you're different than you were before. And especially if it's a spouse, you know, say, well, who is this person? I don't recognize her. All she does is cry, or, you know, she gets mad easily or whatever. I help you figure out who you are now, who you want to be. And then I help you to learn to dream again, to think about the future. Because a lot of times it's like, yeah, I can't think about tomorrow, much less 5 years from now. But I help you learn to imagine what life could be. And then I help you get there.
You know,
So,
it is so important that we don't put our grief on the back burner.
mhm.
Um, my father died 12 years before my mother. My dad had had health problems most of my life, but he also he fought it. You
Yeah.
know, most of the time you wouldn't know that he was ill. And when he died, um, I don't know what was different, but my mother was acting so strong, and she was strong. She just like took over.
Yeah.
Um, I didn't cry. I didn't use the words, I'm going to miss him. It took me a long time. And when I finally did, I was totally lost. Why is it now, years later, I'm crying, I miss him, and for the last couple years, yeah, I would look up at the sky as I was driving and I would talk to him and I was fine. But then it hit me, oh my God, I'm talking to something in the sky that I can't see. Why haven't I cried?
Delayed grief.
And when my mother got ill and I went to move in with her, um, one of the clergy individuals came in, and all of a sudden it just started crying my eyes out and put his arm around me. He said, it's a very normal feeling. I said, I'm not crying for her. I said, I missed my dad. And I became what I considered this blubbering idiot.
Because you would normally, if your mother was sick, you would have leaned on your dad for strength.
Yep.
And he wasn't there.
Exactly.
Yeah.
And that's exactly what the clergy said to me.
Yeah.
He said, you obviously had a very close relationship with your dad. And I said, I did. He said, you just didn't want him to go. So because you didn't want him to go, you didn't deal with it.
Yeah.
Now your mom is lying in this bed. She doesn't always know what's going on. You know what's going on. You're not going to have her strength, and your dad's gone. And just thinking about that, I was so glad I could go through it. I was so glad I had somebody understanding.
Yeah.
Because not to put my brother down, but I think if my brother would have seen it, he would have said, hey, get over it. Because that's his way of dealing with life. So we have to expect there are going to be people in our life that are going to make that comment.
Oh, yeah. Like, it's been 6 months. Aren't you over it yet? Excuse me.
Exactly.
And that's why a lot of things, a lot of people will not admit to the depth of their feeling when they lose an animal, a pet, because it feels like people are going to look down on them. Like, why are you so upset? It was just a dog. Well, no, it wasn't. He was a member of the family. It's like I
Exactly.
lost a child. He was with us for 16 years, whatever. Also, people won't talk to you. They won't bring it up if it was a drug overdose or if it was suicide. They're afraid to talk about it because they don't know if you want to talk about it. So you think they don't care. That's how you lose a lot of friends, is because they're backing off for whatever their reason is. You think they don't care. And they're actually probably backing off because they do care.
Absolutely.
They don't want to say the wrong thing or do the wrong thing, so they say or do nothing. And it can be hurtful. It can be very hurtful, especially if it goes on, if it continues, because they get into the habit of, you've got to live with that loss every day. Whereas they can go about their lives.
Exactly.
And the only time they think about that loss is when they see you. So if
Exactly.
they don't see you, they don't have to think about it.
Well, I tell individuals, if you're not sure how to deal with other people's loss, I think it's important you meet with a grief coach.
Yeah.
Because a grief coach will show you and give you the tools. In the past, it's been a year. I've seen a grief coach for 3 different losses. Only one is a death.
Yeah.
The first one happened to be my divorce that happened
Okay.
almost 50 years ago.
Oh, wow. And you never processed the grief for it.
Never real. I cried initially, and then it was okay. I want to go live my life. He doesn't want me. I'm going to go have a life. And I was young. at that time. And, you know, it wasn't easy, but I got through it and sort of like threw it away. But then I also realized I threw away some very good things that happened in that marriage.
Yeah.
And I had to acknowledge that, you know what? Even though for years I've been saying, you know, it was his fault, it I don't know if it was anybody's fault. Maybe we were too young, maybe it was the wrong time, but it didn't make a difference. I had to come to grips with, you know what? I'm not going to grieve about it anymore.
Mhm.
He went on with his life. I went on with my life. We have a son that, you know, we share together, and we share that son. And how wonderful is that after all these years? But then I also went to the same grief coach because 10 years ago, I was pushed out of my corporate America job.
Yeah, losing a job, that's a huge cause for grief,
And I
especially
was
if
angry.
you're
Yeah.
higher up.
And I was angry at them.
Yeah.
And I dealt with that anger, but I didn't realize that all this time I had been grieving over the what if.
Yeah.
What if I could have stayed? What if they wouldn't have done this? You know, economically, everything. And it was draining me. And when I went through the coaching for that, it just opened up my eyes and said, you know what? I think now I'm not going to be perfect when it happens again, but I at least have tools and I have people to go to.
Mhm.
And so, with that, how do our listeners find you? Because we all need a grief coach.
Well, my email is easy. It's cindy@cindyjburns.com. On Facebook, I'm Cindy Judd Burns, Judd. So you can always send me an instant message. I answer them all, unless you're creepy. Those I don't
Don't
answer.
blame you.
Oh, you have a beautiful smile. No,
Yeah. Yeah.
you.
Yeah.
Um, and I'm Cindy J. Burns on Instagram. I'm not there as much. I'm mostly Facebook.
Okay.
So they can find me there. And my website is being redone, but you can go there. And that's cindyjburns.com.
Well, we're gonna have
Not
all that.
pretty. Don't judge me on my website.
Okay. Well, we'll put all that in the show notes.
Right.
And in the meantime, I will be getting in touch with you because I'd love to have you on Grief Belief, because I think that you have so much to share, and it is a panel of grief coaches. I'm the only one who's not a grief coach,
Oh,
um, that I have put together, and I will tell you they're all different experiences at all different levels.
everybody goes about it differently. We all have different
Exactly.
modalities.
And that's what is so important. And that's what's so important for our listeners to know is that you are not alone, but don't expect that your grief is going to look like your siblings or your children or your next door neighbor. Your grief is your grief, and you get to choose how you handle that. But if you need help, there's always a life purpose coach out there. Thank you so
I do have a gift for your listeners. If you are the one grieving, I have a guided grief journal. It gives you prompts to help you through it. Journaling, it helps so much because it gets it out of your head.
right.
Um, and that is cindyjburns.com/journal. If you have a friend that's you want to help, but you don't know what to do or what to say or how to do it, I have a small pamphlet. I don't have a website for that. Just contact me either email or through Facebook instant message, and I'll be glad to send you that too.
Sounds wonderful. Well, thank you so very, very much. Have a wonderful day, and we'll talk to you soon.
All right, thank you so much for having me.
Thank you. Bye-bye now.
Bye-bye.